Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's expert session with Arthur Castillo, master of the dark funnel arts. I am Rebecca. I'm the head of community at Common Room, which means I'm responsible for stewarding many of the channels Arthur is going to discuss today. So I'm doubly excited to learn more, even more alongside you, about the best practices for bridging digital channel interactions and sales outcomes in a way that's natural for members, users, and prospects. This is something that is constantly on our mind at Common Room and constantly at our mind in terms of, on my mind personally, in terms of building community and driving business impact. So enough about me. I'm excited to introduce Arthur Castillo, a leader who abides by the ABCs of always being curious and is in charge of strategic sales and dark social and evangelism at Chili Piper, which helps B2B revenue teams double inbound conversion. So really excited about those numbers and to talk to Arthur today. Welcome, Arthur.
Wow, what an intro. Yeah, typically I guess I'm used to doing my own, but I might just copy and paste what you just put there. So that was great.
Well, I'm glad. I think one of my superpowers that I would put on a resume that's like, what else do you do? I'd be like, I really love writing intros for people. So I'm glad you that. So the dark funnel has clearly been on lots of folks' minds lately, including ours, like I just said. And in fact, Kevin White, who's our marketing leader and who often leads these expert interviews, is giving a talk on the dark funnel at RevCon at this very moment. And so in that spirit, we're excited to bring this close-knit discussion to even more folks in a more intimate way today. And so for today's session, we had promised to cover what dark social actually means and then how to leverage peer-to-peer networks to a team's advantage to help drive pipeline and impact those sales, how to measure success for dark social. So not only what it means, but then what it means to measure it and understand how to validate its efficacy. And then ways to capture word of mouth and transform them into actionable insights for sales, marketing, and overall GTM teams. So what do you say? Shall we dive in?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm excited.
Awesome. Oh, and Arthur and I just talked about this backstage. And so before I continue, I'm happy to answer questions along the way. You don't have to hold your questions to the end. We, of course, want to make this as interactive and discursive of a session as possible. We also promise to hold 10 minutes at the end. So if you have questions that are inspired along the way, we'll make sure to invite that discussion as well. So please post them in the chat. We're here to talk. We're here to have an intimate conversation about the dark funnel arts. So Arthur, if we could start with a definition that'll help us like contextualize what we're talking about today. So how do you define dark social at Chili Piper? And then what are the dark social channels that Chili Piper is tapping into specifically?
Yeah, sure. Let's start with the definition. So I actually went back and kind of changed my definition. Before, I would always say like it's basically rebrand of word of mouth, right? These word of mouth channels have always existed. People want to hear from their peers. The difference, I think, is twofold. One, the frequency and the channels at which it exists. So I think if you look at even how we use LinkedIn now, before you're probably only on LinkedIn if you're looking for a job, right? The digital resume, you're looking at who has job openings. You're not necessarily using it as network to learn from your peers, but that's changed completely. We've seen Slack communities. That's so now before where it might have been some sort of annual conference that we could finally see our peers and discuss challenges and opportunities. Now it can happen daily, right? It can happen from somebody just sharing their thoughts on LinkedIn. It can happen in a DM saying, hey, I know you have the exact same title as me. I'm coming across this issue of inbound lead process. Like, how the heck have you fixed that? So I think the frequency at which it happens, but I think we're moving more and more to like less people want to have sales involved on their buying decisions and purchasing. So they're trying to do more of it themselves. And they're also relying on peers to really like start that buying journey and saying, hey, I'm running into this issue. Let me ask a bunch of my peers, see how they're handling it today. So if you listen to even typically how people come inbound into the funnel, they might say stuff like, I heard you on a podcast, or I saw what you were writing about on LinkedIn and it really resonated with me. These are, I think the difference is like this self-serve slash peer-to-peer journey where people are trying to take more of the onus on themselves. They don't necessarily want to hear from somebody that they're doing it wrong. They want to learn as much as possible themselves before they start reaching out to, I guess, a company to explore solving that potential problem. So, in ways, to recap that, kind of like word of mouth, the frequency and channels at which it happens has gone from maybe once annually to daily. So that's completely changed how buyers are evaluating technology. And then I think it's through the delivering of certain pieces of content that you might not necessarily always get the attribution, or it could be having these face-to-face conversations with other people and they say, hey, go check out Chili Piper. And you type it in Google and the attribution software tells you, hey, you should invest more in Google ads. Well, actually, it was your raving champion at this conference that mentioned it to his peer. And that's really what started. So hopefully that gives the audience a better idea of how we think about dark social here, and yeah, how it's kind of changed the way we've approached go-to-market.
So do you think, going off script here, but to dive a
Mhm.
little deeper into that, would it almost be like what SEO in the early and mid 2000s was doing, where it's like this self-service idea of people are going to type something in and then see what, like, hopefully find some articles that help them understand something more about the solution they're looking for? That's being replaced, or has been replaced, by really people aren't typing in something for an SEO to hope to find an article. They're going to like subreddit. They're going to Slack channel. They're going to whatever community or forum, and then really trying to see what real people are saying really about these things. And so, do you think those would be almost an analogy in terms of what SEO was trying to do when people were self-serving for solutions, and now it's replacing that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some similarities there in terms of yeah, seeking out the answer before it be Google. Now, obviously, we have AI and Chat GPT, so I know some folks are starting to go there. But I think it's what I've always looked at in terms of the missing gap that often sales and marketing teams have is we can speak to the why, right? Why the product was created in the first place, the problem we're trying to solve. We can speak to the what, which is, hey, these are the features that you're going to be using that help you solve this problem. But very rarely can we speak to the how, right? And I think um, SEO probably struggled with that back in the day. And I think there's a certain limitation that we reach just through, let's say, content or things like that. The how is where folks want to learn from their peers, right? How are they using this tool every day? How is it, what can they do now that they haven't been able to before? How does it integrate with their current tech stack? And it doesn't replace certain things. So, yes, there's definitely some similarities there, but I think people want to see more the how, kind of the lifting of the curtain, the tactical, seeing somebody else in my position use the tool. That seems to, yeah, be something that I know my side being on both sales and marketing, like, is very tough to do. And I think the best way to do that is through your customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can imagine too, it matters that position to position point of view, because you're like, in my position, is the juice worth the squeeze? It doesn't mean that it's not, X tool is not a great tool, but you're like, is it a great tool for me in
Yeah,
precisely what I'm trying to achieve? And so being able to find peer-to-peer networks where people are in those same positions is so much better than being like, oh, here's a general solutions page, you know?
exactly.
Um, so let's talk a little bit about the how at Chili Piper. How are you all activating your dark social efforts? And then how are you measuring or validating whether or not they're working for you?
Yeah. So the how are we, the first question was, how are we measuring it, or
How are you activating them? Like, what are some
how
of
are
your
we activating?
tactics that you're doing on the daily?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, my start in marketing here at Chili Piper was actually starting up the field marketing team. And through that, I guess part of it was also a lot of community work. So during the time, it was still COVID. A lot of these communities, Slack communities, were blowing up, and people were flocking to them. And as such, yeah, communities started to spin up, and they're like, "Hey, we have, I don't know, 1,000 members in marketing within our community. Do other companies want to potentially get their message in front of them?" So we sponsored probably 10 plus communities during this time. Got a chance to really see yeah, work with them. A lot of them might have given like a menu of, hey, you get, I don't know, one Slack blast monthly, couple of webinars, maybe an in-person executive dinner, things like that. And really got a chance to, yeah, work with those communities to see that work. There was a certain point at some of these in-person dinners where going back to this peer-to-peer buying and knowing that buyers want to hear from their peers, we started doing these in-person dinners to, and really I think the magic was one, the timing of it. Everybody was holed up inside, so we're like, okay, let's get in front of everybody so we can have these gatherings with yeah, peers in person. But we also tried to invite our top customers and sit them next to our best prospects. So that way,
Mm.
rather than somebody like me hopping up on stage and saying, "Hey, the Chili Piper's the best," they're actually hearing it from a peer. And what was really cool is I got a chance to witness this. So Hillary Carpio, if some of you are familiar with her, of Snowflake, she was at one of these dinners. We were talking, grabbing a drink. Another co-founder came by, and this co-founder, he was invited by a sales rep that said, "Hey, the deal stuck. I don't know what to do. I saw you have a dinner in San Francisco. Should I invite this co-founder?" I said, "Absolutely." So we start talking. He asks Hillary about Chili Piper. She says two or three sentences, and he literally says, "That's a no-brainer," and the deal closes within 2 weeks. And I
Wow.
got to hear it, and like I still wish I could copy and paste those 2 to 3 sentences. I would have used it, but there's something about it coming from her, right? Of like, this is how I use it. This is what we're able to do. And he said, "Yep, that would solve a major problem." Um, so yeah, that was kind of the first aha moment that we had of like, we wanted this to happen. I saw it happen in front of me. And lo and behold, this deal that was stuck in pipeline now all of a sudden is closing 2 weeks later. So we said, okay, there is something here. So I think a lot of, at least where we started, was through these kind of in-person events. We wanted to really have a mix of potential buyers and our customers, and creating these organic moments where a lot of the time we wouldn't even have an agenda. They would know, obviously, they're here on behalf of Chili Piper, but again, hearing it from a peer, that really helped. Over time, that it was always through the lens of like field marketing and events, I think. Um, we started having success with these in-person dinners, and we're saying, hey, what if we did larger ones at some of these conferences, these offsite activations? And yeah, we started getting more I guess awareness around, hey, Chili Piper's having a party at Dreamforest, Chili Piper's having a party at Saster. Let's go to these things. And again, same kind of playbook, invite customers, prospects so they could talk there. Um, so a lot of it was very focused through that. And then finally, we recognize we're making a huge investment in some of these conferences, and a lot of the time it's like 1 or 2 days and then you're out. You don't really get anything from it, maybe a lead list. And we said, what if we started creating content at these events? I was trying to curate the experience for those folks that weren't there, and maybe even highlight and take a little bit of an ABM approach of like, oh, this person's here at this conference. Let's actually shoot content with them and create a quick little clip, get their insight around a topic maybe that we know that we can impact, whether it be marketing and sales alignment, qualifying leads, different things like that. So all to say, a lot of it focused around our field marketing efforts, but trying to integrate them through communities, bringing our customers into our events, creating these organic moments for potential buyers with our top customers. And ultimately, like, yeah, posting a lot of that stuff on LinkedIn, trying to start a discussion around it, using it as a way, eventually, even for our SDRs to say, hey, by the way, Arthur actually just interviewed your VP of marketing, and we may be able to help based on your answer here. So those are just a couple of ways in which we've like started to, I guess, try and push forward this idea of dark social and creating these organic moments within our field marketing efforts.
Yeah, I have so many questions to dive into there, especially
Yeah.
because I think this is only us starting to unpeel the skin of the onion of the how, right? Which is like, how are you activating it? And you're activating dark social by bringing people together with the right people, and then making sure that you are like creating content either, opportunistically or even after the fact, to make sure that other people can be brought into the conversation. And then you're bringing other teams in, right? You're like, okay, how do we make sure that field marketing is doing, how do we make sure that everyone's operating on all cylinders? Field marketing, sales, marketing as a like overall organizational function. And so I'm wondering if you can dive a little bit deeper into this like tactical walkthrough almost
Mhm.
of who owns what across those, in terms of, okay, we know that we want to have this, IRL event that so much more is going to be generated from, but then that means like, how are your sales teams finding the right people to,
Yeah.
finding the right prospects to invite, right? And then how are you working with maybe success or other organizational functions to be like, here's the customers that we want in seat there. And then in terms of field marketing, bringing it all together, um, how are each of these teams operating to be able to successfully have the right people in the right place and surfacing them to make sure all the way through that IRL experience?
Yeah, this is great question, great place to start. We'll start peeling back the how to of how to make this happen. And I think the first caveat is you really have to have somebody strong in operations. It can fall apart so easily. So let's try and break it down from a point of, okay, we know we are going to have this event in San Francisco. What sort of happens? I do have somebody on. I'll give a shout out to Kara. She started
Ooh,
on field
Kara.
marketing. Started on field marketing, is now in customer marketing, which kind of worked out perfectly because she was often the liaison. And by the way, this is like a super tactical tip. I know there's always like ROE of, hey, don't reach out to this customer. Please reach out to CSMs. I don't know if you'll be able to get this through, but we have a decision memo process. And I learned this from a previous manager of trying to box people's answers in by a certain time. So that might sound something like, hey, CS team, we are throwing an event in San Francisco. Here is a list of all of our customers that are based in San Francisco. Could you please check off if you don't want us reaching out within 3 days? Otherwise, we will just reach out. So we're trying to give them a little bit of a heads up saying, hey, this is what's happening. 3 days, please like look through the list. We have it sorted by customer account owner. So they could quickly filter through their name and say, yep, maybe this customer is, I don't know, not in a good space. I don't think we should invite them. Yes, they're a raving champion type of thing. But we're basically giving them the 3 days grace. And I will say a lot of the times they probably didn't even look at it. But that's how we're trying to get them a little bit involved of like, this is what we want to do, but we are not just going to wait for you to say, yeah, 2 weeks later, hey, this customer isn't a good fit, or hey, they are a good fit. We're just providing them with a list, making it easier to filter and say, if we don't hear from you in 3 days, we are going to reach out anyway. Very similar process with our business development team and our sales team. So we'd have these different lists based on regions of customers and say, hey, can we reach out to them? Biz dev, we would do the same thing. Look for company HQ's contact geography based to say, hey, they seem to be in this San Francisco region. Why don't you create a step in your cadence? Oftentimes, we would even create the email for them and say, hey, by the way, a bunch of your peers are meeting in 20 of your peers are meeting in San Francisco. The likes of people like Udi from Gong, this and that, have a couple of like highlight real names that people would say like, oh yeah, I'd love to rub elbows with them. Thought it might be worth it. Are you interested in joining the invite list or something like that? And that way, for the biz dev side, it's such a nicer touch than, hey, I was on your website. Do you want a demo? Right? It's you're trying to add a little bit more value there. Of, by the way, a bunch of your peers are meeting, and we thought you'd be a great fit for this. And then similar thing with sales, right? We'd say, hey, we did we ran a report on opportunities. We seem to think your contact here is in the local area. Are you open to inviting them and leaving it up to them? Again, kind of the 3 days grace. Oftentimes, like we would hear from them. AEs after, especially after that first one closed that deal that was stuck in pipeline. It was it's almost like monkey see, monkey do, right? Like so many times we try to take the approach of like, please invite your customers. One, you need a champion to say, oh my gosh, I invited them to one of these in-person dinners and my deal closed 2 weeks later. Now all of a sudden they're like super excited about it. But yeah, really just taking the approach of like giving them a heads up and then saying, if we don't hear from you in 3 days, we're just going to invite them anyway. So hopefully that will unblock a lot of you marketers out there that are always looking for permission. I think it's really a great tactic in getting feedback from anybody and saying, hey, I just wrote this up. I need your feedback by this date. Otherwise, we're going to move forward with these options. So that's how Kara was really like the liaison between a lot of these teams, filtering these lists based on geolocation, giving them the option, boxing them in, and then saying, hey, ideally it comes from you. Otherwise, it would come from us. Later on, what we started to do is sometimes we'd even have these emails come from a higher up title, whether it be our CEO, our SVP of sales. If we're going for more of a sales audience, I know sometimes they would come from myself too, trying to use, I guess, whatever LinkedIn street cred I had, and yeah, get people enticed about the opportunity there. So I don't know if I'm missing anything there, Rebecca, but that was like typically how we would start out in trying to operationalize the entire process of, we know we're having an event in San Francisco. How do we get everybody aligned in the same page? And how do we kind of give ourselves permission to continue to push our own campaign, whether or not, we got feedback within those 3 days?
Yeah, I love that. I think what you're describing, right, is this idea of shared agency across teams with individual autonomy from each team. Being like, here's a shared agency. Please interact if you can or want to, if it's important to you on your priority list. And after 3 days, I'm taking back my individual autonomy, and we are going to do this moving forward as a marketing team. I have this like next how question, which I think actually works perfectly with what John had asked. We have a few questions coming in now. And so I was curious, like we're talking about, some of those IRL in real life, dark social, dark funnel types of strategies, right? Where it's like word of mouth, peer-to-peer networks. But then what we probably want to move to is like, how do we bridge that in real life type of experience into the digital aspect, right? Into how do we like scale this at a large volume to get more people involved in the conversation who couldn't be there IRL. And that we can now take these dark conversations happening, right? And then make sure to amplify them across all sorts of networks, especially the digital networks. So I think this sort of rolls into John's question, where John asked, what do you think are the most effective dark social strategies for digital platforms, LinkedIn, X, et cetera, especially if you're a B2B SaaS company looking for B2B revenue?
Yeah, love this question, John. Love how you framed it too, Rebecca. So one of the first things I'm going to say is people love data and even surveys, right? If you can come out of that event, and I think I saw Tracy ask, how big were your events? For this one specifically that I'm talking about, Tracy, in-person dinners, anywhere from 20 to 30 attendees. So pretty intimate, often have maybe 1 to 3 tables where people are getting to share a lot of these things. So over time, what we started doing is giving these dinners maybe a theme or a topic of, hey, what we would be discussing, not necessarily giving them an agenda or questions to say, hey, now you have to discuss this, but maybe just bumping them in the right direction of, hey, we want to talk about sales and marketing alignment, for example. One thing that we started doing is kind of quickly surveying either pre-dinner and saying, is there anything that you really want to talk about around this topic, right? And survey people. Maybe we're coming out of that and saying, hey, we just had a dinner with 20 VPs of marketing and we talked about sales and marketing alignment. And these were their top 3 challenges. Does this resonate with anybody else, right? So how I'm thinking about it, John, is what are the discussions we're having? How are we kind of capturing that data? And then how are we repurposing it on LinkedIn and saying, okay, this was a very small, intimate group. It could not be, maybe it's the same for everybody else that's a VP of marketing, but this is what we learned, right? And continuing that discussion. So I think anytime you can like survey or have data, a lot of the time we would even use that as a place to kick off discussions, right? Hey, what's funny about sales and marketing alignment is 6 out of 20 of you actually answered this was your top challenge. And Rebecca over here actually had a pretty unique opportunity on how she manages sales and marketing alignment. Rebecca, would you actually be willing to kind of kick off the conversation, right? So even using that, the pre-survey to attendees and saying, this was pretty interesting. We surveyed attendees before our dinner and 6 out of 10 came back and said this was the number one challenge. Is that something that you're interested in? So I think I got to give a shout out to Devin Reed, formerly of Gong, and they built an
Devin.
empire on just just having so much data that Gong would have, and really having these like insightful discussions. Now, obviously, as Clary, and he's doing something very similar, but that's what we noticed around. People love having discussions around data, whether it's, hey, that validates my experience. Oh, I didn't even think about it that way. Huh, that's interesting. This is my top challenge, but I guess a lot of my peers are struggling with this. I think that's a great place to start in terms of maybe extending some of these dark social moments that you're getting in your smaller, more intimate events, and then just using that same strategy to kind of amplify it on LinkedIn and get people curious and trying to join that discussion.
Yeah, and John, Matt, and Tracy, thank you for your questions. You're like leading the discussion. I'm looking at my notes, being like, I was just about to ask that, and you all are asking it. So I think Arthur is leading the way here for us in terms of the next, consecutive question, which I think, Matt, I want to focus on your question here, which is Arthur is like a lead of strategic sales as well. So now you're bringing these people in, right? It's peer-to-peer networks, it's dark funnels. Now they're moving to that digital space, and you're able to do that. I love this with a pre-survey. So you can even amplify that on digital, like across your digital networks before the thing actually happens. And then that's already feeding into that like digital progress and experience, like all the way before the event starts, during the event, after the event, and then making sure there's like a virtuous cycle of people wanting to keep contributing. Like, yes, turns out what I thought in my pre-survey is actually totally different than what I've heard from my peers, or actually totally matches. But I'm curious in terms of strategic sales now. So now you've done the marketing part, you've gotten the people together, you've gotten people in seat, you've gotten this engine of content happening and conversations happening. What then happens in the transition from the marketing to sales? And then how do you see those conversations like impacting sales pipeline? And then how do you attribute them, right? Do you have an attribution model at Chili Piper?
Yeah, we do, and it's taken many different iterations. We used to be a last touch attribution, which for any of those listening, I feel your pain. I feel like this just puts sales and marketing against one another, and attribution became more of a thing of credit versus actually trying to understand where they came from. And this is good. Like, we seem to be closing these deals at 40-50%. Let's do more of this. So what we started doing was more on like the influence side of things, but we're trying to track it based on a campaign within Salesforce, right? So if we know they attended San Francisco dinner May 15th, we're adding them to that campaign and seeing pretty much like, we do look 30, 60, 90. So I'd say like, okay, coming out of that dinner, did we have any conversations that people said, look, I've always wanted to learn more about Chili Piper, would love to have a demo? Great. Those are some easy wins that we can measure right from the get-go of saying, cool, we just had this dinner, we booked 4 demos. We would also route those to SDRs. In some cases, if it was our customer, we just reintroduce them back to their account manager and their CSM and saying, hey, had an awesome time meeting you. Just wanted to put you back in touch with your team there. In case you had any questions about Chili Piper, maybe there was a specific use case that we talked about, and we're kind of giving a nudge there. Ultimately, I'd say like through campaigns, there's we also do, and this is like non-fancy tech stack way to do it, the self-reported attribution. We do it after they fill out a demo form, which I know a lot of people, and Chris Walker probably in particular, is saying like, nope, have it right on the form. Like, you want to get 100% of those answers. We still get a good amount of people coming in and filling that out of like, great, you just booked a demo. How did you first hear about us? And that gives us a little bit of an inkling of like, cool, LinkedIn was this. A lot of the times, what's interesting is like they might actually remember the first time that they heard about us, and it might be a conference we exhibited at like 1 or 2 years ago. So it's always a thing about timing. That's one way in which we're looking at it. But to answer your question, Matt, I think it's really through the campaigns in Salesforce, and we're looking for like, sure, the 30-60 immediate results, but after a while, within I'd say even kind of we're looking at it a year out, and we're just running reports and saying, cool, out of all of these people that attended our in-person dinners, how many actually created pipeline from it? How many actually ended up being like a closed one? And we're doing the same thing with our conferences as well, to say, we're not looking for that to be the point of conversion necessarily, but did they kind of go through that campaign? Did they attend an event? Did they come by our booth? Did they, I don't know, different ways in which, like, I guess we would have trackable touch points, typically through a lead list. And those untrackable ones are more so like the self-reported attribution. But this is where I'm thinking that there's a lot of new companies out there that are starting to do some cool things with attribution 2.0, and I haven't seen it, so maybe we should talk after, Rebecca. But my understanding is Common Room kind of helps you with identifying some of those things too. So I think it's a combination of like, if you have trackable lead lists, sure, campaigns are great in Salesforce, and seeing immediate short term and then long term, hey, did that at least flow through some of these activities that we can tie back to pipeline, and gives us some indication. And then I think the self-reported attribution of just asking for that on your form, you'll get a lot of interesting insights. And if you mirror that with a tool that can take it further than probably your Google Analytics or HubSpot attribution analytics, then you're probably in a good spot.
I appreciate you mentioning Common Room. Yes, I'm giving you a big wink, like, yes, absolutely. But I would say more than some of those things, like our whole goal is that we're designed to help you with basically all of those things. So, what happens to bring in deep intent signals from across dark funnel channels and digital channels and community interactions and product usage data combined with your customer relationship management systems. When you bring all that data together, that's when you're really being able to see the relationships between individuals, the organizations they roll up into, and then really enabling those sales teams to have like contextual rich conversations based on where that person is in their customer journey. But enough about Common Room. Come say hi if you're interested in that. And I'm sure you and I will talk after. But I want to talk a little bit about the two T's that you mentioned. You mentioned, or you didn't call them the two T's, but this is how they stuck in my brain: timelines of attribution and then tech stack. So first of all, a timeline, something I think about all the time as the head of community here, our Uncommon community, which is Common Rooms. It's a community of both practice and product. So community leaders, GTM leaders, community-led growth, DevRel leaders, they can talk about the practice overall, best practices for, trying to attribute community work to that sales pipeline or to increase like distribution across like marketing goals. In terms of the Uncommon community, right? It's a longer term play often, where if we want people to join the community for the practice of it, they might join the community first to be like, I want to do my job better, and then through that understand how Common Room can serve them as a product. And so it's not necessarily a to B like prospect customer, but a prospective industry value alignment to a community member to a customer, which is could be a bit longer in the front end of that attribution cycle, right? And so I'm curious if you have any, in terms of timelines, like expectations you might want to set in terms of what you've seen at Chili Piper for when people are investing in the dark funnel space. Like, okay, I should be seeing returns on this within 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. Like, what is that initial investment so that people don't already set themselves up for failure where they're like, oh, I should know in 2 weeks, and then they don't have the data they need.
Yeah. I think, even to your point of like prospect to customer or even demo, it's what we all want, but it never is, right? And there's some people that might not have even known Chili Piper existed, and we get on a phone call and it solves their problem. They're like, "Cool, where can I sign?" Other folks I've heard tell me, "Hey, I've been selling Chili Piper internally for 1 to 2 years before I even got the go ahead from my manager to finally look into this, and it became a priority." So um, it's really tough, and I think like I I'll also mention the fact that we have founders that are bought into this idea of dark social. And I know Dave Gerhardt has the famous quote of like, don't work for a CEO that doesn't understand marketing. I'm very lucky in that sense that they, of course, everybody wants direct attribution and saying, hey, we just spent $100,000 on Dreamforce. What do we get coming out of it? I think there's different metrics in which you can measure too, if we're even using that trade show experience coming out of it. And this is something I advocate, like so many marketers do, rather than just scan badges. You're paying thousands of dollars to get in front of your buyers only to follow up with them digitally. Like it blows my mind. So always pressure test that conversation. Hey, Rebecca, it sounds like this might be of interest to you based on what you just shared with me. Are you open to booking a demo? That way, at least you are battling over calendar space versus trying to stand out in their inbox. Because guess who else is saying, Rebecca, it was so nice to meet you at Hubs or at Dreamforce. Yeah, it was really great learning about your business. Are you open to booking a demo? Like, my gosh, we just elongated that process. You just gave yourself like such a tough time to stand out because everybody's just deleting those emails of like follow up from Dreamforce. So nice seeing you at Dreamforce. I'm like, no, no thanks. So
Yeah.
That helps coming out of it saying, hey, guess what? We just scanned 1,000 badges that sales has no idea or the context into how far along, if they have a problem. Like they're not going to follow up with them because they don't even know. So that's a tough one. We're coming out of that trying to look for booked meetings and saying, cool, we had 30 good conversations and we booked 25 demos. That, at least from average pipeline funnel math, we can say, okay, ACV at Chili Piper, just under 10K, 25. Okay, so we at least got the pipeline potentially to coming out of this trade show that we could break even on it. But again, I think we're also looking, and what's been nice too, and I don't know if if your operations are this tight, but we have data showing that the investment we made back in HubSpot 2021 is still paying dividends. People are saying, yeah, this is where I first met your team. So if you can start to paint that picture of maybe even longer sales cycles and saying, hey, this was something we tried a year and a half, 2 years ago, and now people are actually coming back into the funnel, that helps. But coming out of it, I think we're looking for those short-term metrics of like booked meetings. Then we're looking at meetings held, right? And I know a lot of the time that can be like 50 to 60% no show rate. So you're obviously looking at that. But I think going back annually and then saying, hey, based on our investment, either across all of our field marketing campaigns or conferences in this case, or on a one-by-one basis when they're inevitably coming back and saying, hey, do you want to spend 200K this year at Dreamforce? And you're like, let me look to see if at least the right types of folks came through and created pipeline and what rate that closed. So I guess, yeah, long-winded way of saying we're looking for those short-term, immediate, hey, we either booked a demo right from those conferences, but we're also, and I have the grace of our founders knowing that we're not necessarily looking at kind of a one-to-one thing in terms of, yeah, we just spent 100K, we're trying to get 100K of closed won revenue within a certain number of months or weeks. The other thing is we're trying to think about it in ways of like, if we came out of here with no pipeline or not a lot of pipeline, what other wins can we show? And that's really where the content at events, or sometimes we've rented podcast space, right? And we said, hey, we just shot content with 5 CMOs, and that's going to help our digital and our LinkedIn strategy. So on top of that, we have maybe potential ins as not only do we have content that we can share with our audience, but following up with these folks. And these are accounts that we'd love to break into. So just looking at ways in which you can like put together, I guess, multiple wins, not necessarily from a pipeline perspective, For us, we also work with like agencies too. So if we picked up agency partners, that's always like a big win. So I know I'm speaking specifically to like field marketing in this case as an example, but I don't know. Hopefully that answered your question, Rebecca. Or I don't know if there's any more questions around that.
Well, I love the idea that you're saying is have adjacent win streams, right? Where it's like, what are the multiple ways we can win when we're going to have this activation, whether or not it's a conference, whether or not it's a evening, dinner event, or whether or not it's like something we're going to do with our social strategy that then continues to expand that distribution across our other channels so that there are multiple ways to measure this win. Two other things that I pulled out of what you were saying is like this idea that maybe there's two temporalities, right? There's the dark funnel temporality of measurement, which is how long did it take for this person to know about us enough, hear about us enough to then enter the sales cycle. And I think when they enter the sales cycle, what we see actually across our customers and our own community is once they're in community channels or once they're in like activated more through like additional channels, like the more channels are activated across, the faster the sales cycles actually are. But there's that dark funnel thing where you're like, if you measured the entire thing, it might be 2 years since they got introduced to you and then saw you once, heard about you again, had a good feeling about you. But then they finally, maybe they jumped to another or took on another role in a different space or a different industry and were finally able to bring you in or had that decision making power or a new decision maker stepped in where the sales cycle is actually really short, but you had to do that front work beforehand so that sales cycle could be so short. One other thing that I think I pulled out, the second thing that I pulled out from what you were saying is perhaps it's not just leads that we want to be like measuring on. Like a lot of times, like at a booth, you might be like, okay, here's how many leads we got. And like, that's one thing that's good. Like the more leads mathematically, the more opportunities, but really it shouldn't be how many leads can we get, but how many meetings can we book, even for the people that are just gold on marketing. Maybe we shift that foundational goal of like even the marketers that are there that usually are just gold on bringing leads in is really how do I as a marketer step into a role as a friend to my sales team to be like, hey, I know that I can tell you about this, but my goal is that you feel compelled to at least book a demo, and like booking a demo is actually that shared goal that we all take on. Okay, we have like 1 more minute and one more question from Tracy that I want to make sure we get to. Tracy had asked, for service companies, how do you track impact on retention?
Ooh, this is a good one, Tracy. I think like if I'm understanding maybe a little bit more of your business is you're not dealing with mass leads, right? It's typically smaller customers, maybe word of mouth referral leads. Maybe I'm completely wrong and you got a bunch of inbound flow coming in for your services business, which keep on doing what you're doing. But it might sound like stupidly simple, but I think you have the benefit of like doing things that don't necessarily scale and just asking them, right? And this can be on a phone call, right? When you're maybe looking into that. It could be some quarterly NPS surveys. I'll tell you another one that I've tested out a couple of times. It's just even asking for feedback of like, hey, we just released this campaign or this case study. You're the same title. Does it like resonate with you? Right. So you're actually seeking out feedback. And I think anything you can do to like, just have more additional dialogue with that customer will definitely help. So I don't know. I think if I'm understanding correctly, you're in a unique place where you can do things that don't necessarily scale. And I think you can just either ask them, maybe send them a survey every so often, or just even ask for their feedback of, hey, we spent a lot of time on this, or we're super excited about this campaign. Would just love any feedback. Does this resonate? Anything that popped out on you. And that way you're actually like kind of ensuring that they're seeing maybe some of your efforts in that sense. So I don't know. Okay. School districts, I see. Maybe let's chat a little bit more on LinkedIn, Tracy, so I can understand it a bit more, but hopefully, I don't know, you took something from those ideas there.
I also wonder if part of that is however it is that you track when people are renewing or coming back, whether or not that is through a survey or when they are in that process of signing the contract, or if it's in Salesforce, if you have sales teams that are taking care of it, can you add a checkbox or a step that's like, is X channels, whichever channels you're using, one of the reasons why you've stayed? Is your access to peer-to-peer
Mm,
networks one of the reasons why you stayed? So whatever it is, whatever dark funnel channels that you might be using, whether or not it's, IRL events, online events, learning events, or like amplification on social media, right? Or being able to connect people through chat apps or whatever it might be. Really listing those out, having a little box just to understand if those ways in which the people are interacting in that dark funnels, in those dark funnel spaces, are part of the thought process of why someone is renewing. And I think that might be, even that checkbox is kind of a simple way to really it's kind of like those help questions. Was this question useful to you? Was this answer useful to you? And it's just like happy face, neutral,
mm.
no. To at least get some indication of like where people's headspace is at when they're renewing. Um,
Love that.
Arthur, thank you so much. Where can people connect with you, follow your work more, and in general, just stay apprised of what's going on with you and Chili Piper?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn a ton. My friends make fun of me saying I'm the LinkedIn guy, so I just posted there in the chat. Would love to connect up with all of you. Yeah, hear if something resonated or just jam about this stuff. I love talking about it. So thank you all for the questions. Yeah, hoping that you all left here with something, and I'm glad we could answer some of those questions live.
I certainly left here with something. Thank you so much, Arthur, for your time. Truly a joy to hang out digitally and then have this conversation.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Bye. Have a great day. Bye, y'all. Thank you so much
Everybody.
for coming. We are at commonroom.io if you have any questions. And most importantly, meet Arthur, follow Arthur, connect with Arthur on LinkedIn. And he never sleeps on LinkedIn, so see him there.
So thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.